Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from last week. Let's get to it. Mike and Natalie videos comments. The Rock said her friend did much better than the online therapist from the other episode. Yeah. Mad Marcia says, poor Doug. He's going to go to therapy because everyone forgot his name was Dave. Was his name Dave? I think I said both, and then I landed on Doug. Okay, it's Dave. Natalie says, I'm so torn about Natalie. On one hand, she can be very articulate about her feelings and needs. Agreed, Natalie. Natalie is commenting on Natalie. And on the other hand, she belittles him, fat shames him, insults his environment and lifestyle. Yeah, it is kind of an interesting swing. Haha, Rachel says, if I see a conflict between other people and have an idea of how to resolve it, should I avoid triangulating myself, or are there ways as a non-psychologist to be a positive influence? Okay, this is interesting. Some people are actually asking questions in the comments below, which I invite. So if you want to ask questions in the comments, maybe I'll get to it in this section. So haha, Rachel says, if I see a conflict between other people and I have an idea of how to resolve it, should I avoid triangulating myself? Okay, so commonly the word triangulation in my field is used for dysfunctional triangulation, meaning that you are inserting yourself in a situation where you're not going to be helpful just because you're curious or you're trying to be helpful, or as the person in conflict, you're dragging other people in when you really ought to just go straight to the source and be more differentiated about it. But some, including me, like to differentiate between functional triangulation and dysfunctional triangulation. When people come to therapy, they're always triangulating me, frequently triangulating me. If it's individual therapy, they're frequently talking about their relationships, and so I am triangulated into some tension or conflict between my client and other people whom I've never met. If a couple comes in, they often are in conflict, and I'm triangulated into their conflict. So what do I do with that? I try to be functional in my triangulation. Dysfunctional triangulation is what results in the conflict not being resolved or bettered in any way. And functional triangulation is when you actually help the original conflict resolve, or you help them to communicate better so that they're communicating in a more differentiated way, a more direct way, a more honest way, authentic way, less accusational way, owning of your own feelings kind of a way, less reactive, less blaming, this sort of thing, depending on the situation. So Rachel, can you be functional in your triangulation? If you see a conflict between other people and you have an idea of how to resolve it, how do you behave in a way that is different from dysfunctional or functional triangulation? It's hard to know, because even if you have a really good suggestion, you actually could inadvertently cause a dysfunctional triangle by being mean to them, or maybe they don't want you involved, or if you're just talking to one person and not the other person could feel left out. And so it really depends. And to some extent, this is why people like me go to graduate school for so long and have supervisors and really think about how we can be of help for people. In one way, you could consider, especially my field of marriage and family therapy, that knowing how to functionally triangulate with people is half of what we spend our time thinking about, if not 90%. It's such a hard thing to do. The normal, typical knee-jerk reaction that people will have is to either overside with the person you're talking to. You know, a friend is talking to you about a spouse that they're having conflict with. There's a tendency to over-identify, that other person's a jerk, and you should break up with him, or you should quit that job, or that kind of thing. So that's a really hard tendency to get out of as a therapist, and I help a lot of trainees get out of that. The other tendency is to identify with the other person and actually to vilify the person you're talking to and say like something is wrong with you. To be functionally triangulated, you have to have everyone in mind and have a sympathetic view towards everyone. And you have to have an analysis, a conceptualization of how they came to this problem to begin with, like with Mike and Natalie. Is it Mike's fault? Is it Natalie's fault? I don't think either one of them are to blame. I think they're both giving it their best shot. And when they're hurt, they don't know how to deal with that. So they put up walls or they insult or something. It triggers the other person. So when you zoom out, neither one of them are to blame. And they're both trying their best. No one's to blame. And really most, if not all, well, not all, but most conflict that you get into with people who you care about, or even people you don't care about for that matter, it is, according to me, this perspective is true. That you head into, even like you're in the mall and you bump into someone and you start yelling at each other, usually it's a misunderstanding based on the fact that maybe people don't know how to communicate very well, or they don't give each other the benefit of the doubt or something. So it's something that is very, very hard to do. And even as a highly trained therapist that's been working in the field for 25 years, it's hard for me too. I have to really push against that tendency. Why do we have that tendency? Well, I think it's because, and I've thought about this a long time, because it is kind of a weird tendency that humans have that really differentiates trained therapists from lay people, is that one, it's not really taught very much in schools about how to think in this systemic way. We have billions and billions and billions of examples, I don't know, billions, many, many examples of culture and politics and news stories and conversations and movies and television shows where someone is to blame. And that's the bad person, and the other person is the good person. The protagonist has the white hat, and the evil Darth Vader has the black hat. There's no system understanding of how everyone was trying their best, and all of them were acting basically reasonable, but yet it resulted in this really terrible result. So without a broader understanding of how systems work, similarly to when people experience climate change, and it's really hard to understand because it's a system. The climate is a system. And when you see cold weather in Texas, you're like, there's no global warming. What are people talking about? Well, it's natural for people to think that because they don't understand how a system of a climate operates. It's very hard to understand how a system operates. In fact, we really barely understand how the climate system works. There's too many factors, but the principles are there in terms of like, as you raise temperatures here, it causes this, which causes that, which causes this, which causes that, and that, there's this runaway effect. And when you study it and you know it, which I barely do, then you understand how the system works. But it's hard to understand. So when someone comes to us and they're like, my boyfriend is an a-hole, or my boyfriend did something mean to me, well, we have now, that's how differentiation works, is that anxiety or tension moves through the triangle. And I don't know if I explained that well enough, is that it's not that we're just triangulated in. It's that there's an original tension between two people. So Mike and Natalie have tension and anxiety. Anxiety meaning not like anxiety about falling off a bridge or something, but anxiety about being rejected, anxiety about humiliation, anxiety about rejection from the relationship. And so they have all this tension. And as you observe that from the third person, including us as the viewer, including me as the viewer, even though we don't know them, we are triangulated in. And their tension gets under our skin. That's why some of the most compelling couples on this show, 90 Day Fiancé, are those who have a lot of tension because it sucks us in. We feel the tension. And if we hooked ourselves up to a bunch of biomarker machines, it would show our cortisol is going up, our blood pressure is going up, our heart rate is going up. All these things are going up because it's natural. As humans, we are extremely socially oriented. We clearly grew up in small tribal groups where we really paid attention to what was going on around us. And if there was tension, it served the gene pool if other people ran in and tried to help. Other people sort of inserted themselves in that so there wasn't battle and death and discomfort in the tribe. We need harmony in the tribe. So as someone that we're watching is fighting, we have this instinct, I would put forth an instinct that we evolved to pay attention to that and move in. Similar to when we hear an infant crying, almost all humans will have all those systems, of stress will happen. Even if it's a baby across, the field that you don't even know, you're just like, oh, there's a couple over there having a picnic and the baby is crying. Our tension will go up. Why do we have that? Well, because it serves the tribe if everyone pays attention to the infant. Because what if the parents don't hear it? Well, I need to go help that baby. And we evolved to have that response. And we also evolved to have a response to other people's tension. We also evolved to have tension and to feel anxiety about rejection in relationships because we need to have coupling so we can procreate and have children. Like my two people procreating. It's a family tree. Anyway, point is that as we feel that anxiety, we want to get rid of that anxiety. We don't want it feels bad. We're like, ugh. And if we don't know any way out, then we will figure out an easy answer. And an easy answer is end the relationship. Get rid of that person, break up with that person, stop doing that thing, quit that job, move out of that house, or your neighbor's bothering you. Well, sell your house. These answers relax us. Okay, there's a solution. Okay, just divorce him. That'll solve the problem. That'll solve my problem because I have anxiety about what you're going through. And of course, what I'm not feeling in the moment as a triangulated third is all the needs that the person has with regards to getting it met through this relationship or their hopes to get it met through the relationship. When we watch Mike and Natalie, it's very easy to say, I don't understand. Why don't they just break up? Well, what we're not feeling because we have a much more stronger antenna when it comes to tension and fear and upsettedness than we have for people's unexpressed needs of love and attention. And so what they're going through, I don't know, Mike and Natalie, I don't know about them, but probably is however much anxiety and discomfort and upsettedness they have towards each other, they have a consummate amount of love and hopes and dreams and affection for each other. And so for us on the outside, say, just dump them. But what that denies is their hopes and dreams for each other, and their own needs for a relationship. So that's why we do that. So anyway, you ask Rachel, are there any ways to be a positive influence? Well, in triangulation, one is the very first thing that Murray Bowen talked about in his theory is to become differentiated overall and also in the moment. So in the moment when you're being triangulated in, and we teach this to our trainees, is you have to relax yourself, your body, your mind, your soul. You have to relax because if you absorb that anxiety and then you become undifferentiated, you're not going to be able to think straight and you're not going to be able to be very helpful. So you got to relax and you have to recognize that you have to know when you're absorbing that energy, that negativity and that fear. So you relax because, the more relaxed we are, the better we can think. Our blood goes to our prefrontal cortex. We're able to think better. So that's step one, number one. Number two is to think about, it's to listen. That's number one, is listen. And if you don't know whether or not you should validate or maybe give a suggestion, because that's usually the decision-making crossroads, listen. Just be like, wow, that sounds really hard. I'm really sorry you're going through that. In that way, you're being a pressure valve for this individual, which people need. Everyone needs that. But you're not really agreeing with them. You're not saying, that person's an a-hole, you need to dump them. And you're not providing any advice. You're just saying, I as a friend know that you're going through that and I feel your pain. And I know what that feels like. I've been through this before. You can talk about stuff like that. Now, if you really want to try to do something other than listening, which is a very important function of humans, it drives me crazy when my trainees say, I feel like I'm just listening. And I'm like, you realize just listening is 95% of the therapeutic value of what you're doing. Like, it's not just listening anyway. So listening is very, very important. Listening well, listening from the heart in the moment, here and now, without an agenda is very, very, we all need that. We all need to be understood. It's a huge human need for everyone, regardless of gender. I just want to point out. And so if you want to say something, then you can just kind of dip in. Well, actually, the next step in between this is, hey, would you like some unsolicited advice? Because I have an urge to like give some suggestions. Do you want to hear that? That's also a good friend, because say your friend's like, no, I'm not really looking for advice right now. I guess I'm just venting. I guess I just want you to understand what I'm going through. Then you know, okay, I'm not going to give any advice. But if you say, hey, would you like a suggestion, because I've kind of been in your situation before, and I've made some mistakes, and so, would you like to hear some ideas? And the person's like, yeah, sure. Then whatever you say should be in the service of getting both of their needs met. And what is that? Well, it's hard to tell, but often what it is both people want to resolve the conflict. Okay, so what do you say? And keep that in mind. The goal isn't to get rid of the anxiety, because if you just want to get rid of the anxiety, then they should just break up. But the goal usually for the individuals is, how are they going to better understand each other? How are they going to deepen their relationship? How are they going to avoid conflict like this in the future? And so if you're advising someone and you're saying things like, well, what do you think your partner didn't understand about you in this whole thing? Or what do you think your partner misunderstood about you? What do you think you're misunderstanding about that? Usually getting to that might help, just asking questions, because that's often where these conflicts come from, is misunderstandings. It's so, whenever people talk about, we need to, couples 100% of the time when they come to me, they say, we need to improve our communication. And what I interpret that to mean is we misinterpret each other a lot. And so we need better ways of communicating so that there aren't misunderstandings. So that's just one suggestion. Anyway, I hope that is good advice to you, Rachel. And I just want to point out, Rachel, that by you asking me that question, you are triangulating me into your relationship with other people who are in conflict, and that's how the anxiety works. Is that I didn't sort of fully explain that. So when two people have anxiety, we feel it, and then when one of those people comes to us and we talk to that person, and that other third person is not in the room, now the anxiety is kind of between us. And so how do we deal with that anxiety? Because this person's like, I'm freaking out, and now you're freaking out because you feel their pain, but also you're freaking out because you're trying to be helpful. And again, one way to just quickly kind of get rid, it's like, well, just get rid of that third person. So to bring it back to this whole systems point of view, is that as you, Rachel, are seeing people who are fighting and you're being triangulated in, there's kind of a tension now between you and these other people maybe in your life, or people that you're imagining. And then you talk to me, and so now I'm triangulated between you and all those other people. And what do I do with that? And do I in a helpful manner help you with this triangle, or do I not? So, and now everyone who's watching me talk to you, Rachel, is invited into you and my relationship with you, Rachel. Is like everyone else that's watching right now who isn't Rachel is now being triangulated in, and that's how tension operates in systems. Is it swirls around, and we all have to make sure that we are relaxed and recognize that we're not actually in threat, because our body tends to react as if we are physically about to be killed, fight or flight reaction, even when that is not what's going to happen. Having minor tension with your spouse is not a life or death matter, but your body feels like it is. Anyway, Via says, going back to Mike and Natalie, I'm sure other people have said this before, but I really think for Natalie and her culture that being married is more important than who she is married to. It's clear to me it doesn't matter who she marries, just as long as she is not single anymore. Okay. I mean, that's one idea which could be true, but usually people aren't like that. I suspect for Natalie that at least there's a part of her that might be there might be some external pressure for her to get married, for sure. I could imagine that. Some people have emailed in about her neck of the woods and how people will put a lot of pressure on people. It's not like they don't put pressure on women in the United States in that way. But it's also possible that in addition to that, she does want to have it work out with Mike and wants to get back to the way things were before. I don't know. Esther says, I'm glad you're talking about healthy examples of triangulation, because I think social media shows a lot of unhealthy examples of people judging other people's relationships. For example, on Reddit, there's a popular advice subreddits where people will submit their interpersonal issues and crowdsource advice. Part of the problem is that the stories are usually heavily one-sided, and people will suggest that the person dump their partner or quit their job or cut off contact with their family anytime there is any kind of conflict at all. Plus, there seems to be pretty strong narrative that you don't owe anything to anybody. I'm sure these sorts of discussions have damaged a lot of repairable relationships between people. Thank you for sharing another point of view. Yeah. The joke I like to say is that because of these phenomena, I as a therapist will always have a job because most people do not know how to be very helpful, or they know how to be helpful, but they have absorbed a propaganda that in order to be helpful, they have to do a certain thing. And so I, as a trained therapist, will always have a job because other people aren't very good at this. Now, I will say that some people, lay people, can be very good listeners, just as good, if not better, listeners. But in terms of like how you advise people about their lives, that's a very complicated thing. And therapists aren't the only people that know how to do this. It takes experience and wisdom and a lot of thought and training and supervision. There are other professions like ministry and, I don't know, being a haircutting person, if you will. There's probably a lot of experience that they have as well. Anyway, point is that, yeah, these subreddits, it doesn't surprise, and I've seen it myself. I don't subscribe to those subreddits particularly, but people will, one, post online and it will be very one-sided, as you're saying. Like, my partner said this and this and this, and you're like, whoa, but if you talk to the partner, you would say, oh, wait, there's another side of the story. There's always another side of the story. The common wisdom is there's your side of the story, there's your partner's side of the story, and then there's the truth. Neither one of you have the truth in your mind because we're emotional observers and memory encoders. That's another important point that I say sometimes, but I hope everyone understands. Your memories, particularly that of conflict with other people in your life, particularly if you've been significantly traumatized as a child, are not reliable narratives of what actually happened. It doesn't mean that you're stupid or there's something wrong with your memory, but we can't rely on it. For myself, when I've had conflict with people in my life, I've been positive in my mind that a certain narrative was correct. In my mind, I'm walking away from the fight and I'm like, this happened and that happened and that happened and this happened. And take it from me as someone who was on the outside of that, you never have the true story. You never have the accurate point of view. You're a participant in it. And so you can't really see through all of the emotional reactivity and the hurt and your things are happening real quick. And so just understanding that. And so when someone is posting something on Reddit and they're like, this happened and this happened, doesn't mean they're wrong. Maybe they have it 99% right. Who knows? But sometimes you just have to wonder, I wonder what the other side of the story is to that. And I recommend that for all kinds of things when it comes to cancel culture, this sort of thing. It's just like, well, what's the full story here? I'm certainly seeing one snippet of the story, but what's the bigger picture here? Anyway, so not only that, but then the triangulated masses on Reddit just jump in and say, break up, cut off your relationship. Because again, it's easier for them to say that because they don't have needs of connection that will be severed by giving that. But they will feel less anxiety if the other person does what they say to do. Zulala says, I'm definitely that person who was like, I'm going to own up to the shit I did, but they better own up to theirs. Oh. So I think I was talking in one of the Mike and Natalie videos about how mutual apologies are very important. I don't remember exactly what I was saying, but something along those lines. It's something that I like to engineer in therapy a lot. And when you're in a relationship, there's also nothing wrong with apologizing, and then once you're done with that process, kind of hoping the other person apologizes too. And so Zulala is saying that, I'm definitely that person who was like, I'm going to own up to my shit over here, but you better own up to yours too. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It is a mutual thing. And by the way, if you ever get apologized to, even if it's a shaky apology, think about taking responsibility for your side too. Even if you believe that you're only responsible for 5% of the problem, it's still 5% of the problem. And given your memory problems, it's probably 25% of the problem. It's probably not 5%. It just feels 5% to you. And you might as well apologize. And if it's 25%, then you're covering your bases. Crystal says, Mike needs to stop wasting her time and let her know it's over. He's being selfish. Oh, so Crystal, Mike needs to stop wasting Natalie's time and tell her that the relationship is over. He is being selfish. Maybe, Crystal. Maybe he's being selfish. But I have worked with a lot of people like this before. I've worked with people who were in much worse shape than Mike and Nat. That's what breaks my heart about the two of them. Is like their problem is so easy to fix. I've worked with so many couples like this, 5, maybe 3 sessions, maybe 2 sessions. I mean, with Dave/Doug, we saw that potential, I mean, looking back on that session, I was kind of, what the Dave style was to be very person-centered, to be very in their world. And the world that they were in was in a very defended place. Maybe if they were in a sessions, Mike and Natalie could have come around to a more hopeful place, or, let's work on this place. But as a therapist for myself, am I prepared to say this? No, I'm probably not. But I guess when I was watching it, Dave doesn't necessarily know the history of Mike and Natalie, whereas I, feel like I do. I probably don't either because I've been watching a show. But as I watch it, I'm just like, oh, no, don't listen to them. They're in their defended place right now. There's something underneath that is hard for them to access. And so, anyway, what was I saying? Crystal, you're saying that he's being selfish and that he knows that it's over. Could be. It wouldn't be the first time that's happened, but I wonder if there's a sliver of hope that he has. He's certainly not making it easy because he's not sort of revealing that vulnerability. Mina says, I really care for this couple. I like both of them, especially Natalie. She touches me very much, and I think they both care deeply about each other, but I think they're better off with other people. It doesn't seem like they are very compatible. I really hope Mike and Natalie end up happy, together, or separate. I agree, Mina. I mean, I don't know if they're not compatible, but they might not be. Gigi says, no, Dr. Kirk, I can't say that I'm pulling for this couple. I don't think that Natalie is in love with Mike, nor he with her. She sees him as a means to an end. She wants a baby. She has said that as much many times. She has said that as much many times. Maybe. Could be. You're as good of a judge as I am, but I usually think that people are in it for a lot of reasons, many of them good reasons, and I imagine that she is in it for a baby, I guess. But it also makes me wonder if she's really, that whole thing about I want a baby last season, I wonder if that was a proxy for, are you really in love with me? Am I in a secure relationship right now? Because the way that she reacted to the baby question last season, she went into a deep, deep, sad place. Very, unbridled sadness, very regressed, childish place. Not that she's childish. We do this when we decompensate. And usually it's not because of a argument about the timeline of having children. Usually it's because of something more fundamental like, am I lovable? Do you love me? Will I ever be loved? Anonymous listener emailed in, by the way. You can email. Go to a website. You should be able to click on a link below, click on the contact page, and you can email me, and sometimes I read them in this section as well. Anonymous listener says, how does one break the cycle of hurting each other? I was watching the video where Natalie was insulting Mike, and I was shocked. But then I realized I do the same. When I'm very hurt, I lash out and try to hurt people by saying things I know will affect them the most. I hate that about myself. It's hard for me to find a therapist in my country, but my boyfriend is trying to get a couples therapist for us with his insurance next month. Thank you for teaching me so much about myself in your videos. I'm excited to explore it more with a therapist. Yeah, good for you, anonymous listener, that you can, in a very mature and empathetic way, identify in yourself, I think I lash out at other people on purpose to hurt them. It takes a big person to admit that, especially by emailing in. To say like, yeah, people do that. In fact, most of the time that's why they're doing it. It's because when they're hurt, they don't want the hurt to happen, you know? And I always like to bring things back to infancy because then it seems to make more sense. Because it's not like we were an infant and then we like went into a cocoon and emerged a butterfly. Like we slowly became an adult and we retain a lot of that fundamental reactivity as a child. It just looks different. As a infant, as an 18-month-old child, you know, if your sibling is in your way or your mom is trying to get you to take a nap, it's not unusual to hit, you know, for an infant to strike. Now, it's very unbothersome if you're picking up a 12-month-old child and they just kind of weakly kind of, you know, do this against you. Oh, okay, you're upset. So over time, we will transform that aggression into words, into ways of hurting people emotionally. And so when we go back to when we're 18 months old and our parent is putting us to bed and we don't want to, we're frustrated because we're being taken away from something that we like, and we're also hurt that someone is not listening to us. You're not listening to me. I want to play. You're not following my demands. You don't get it. You don't get me. You don't understand me. I'm hurt and I'm angry and I don't want you to do that anymore and I'm going to hit you. Okay? As an adult, we all do this. All of us do this. Every single one of us. Just a matter of degree. An anonymous listener, you are recognizing that about yourself. Good for you. All right. Brandon and Julia videos. Aisha says, this is the first time I've ever seen Brandon's mom being rational and motherly towards Julia, even if indirectly. Right, when they were doing the dress. He says, I kind of feel bad for Betty in this episode. She really looked like she was excited, and for once, she was very respectful and listened to Brandon's requests. See what happens when you set boundaries, Brandon? Yeah, that whole interaction, it was very brief, but it was very telling, I thought, in that how often does Brandon act like the parents by being kind of harsh with the parents? How often is Brandon harsh? And we just haven't seen it yet. It wouldn't be unusual. And I say harsh, and I don't know. I just from the outside viewing it, it just seemed like Brandon was a little harsh. Now, you could make the argument that Betty kind of brought that on herself by being a bulldozer this whole time, and now he's just like, no, you know, and setting boundaries is a good thing. But there are other ways to communicate that. You know, I think I said it in the video. You could say, hey, Mom, I know you're really excited about the dress, and I'm glad you're here, but I don't want you to be too forceful with your opinions with Julia because I want to have a space where she can really think of this for herself and not be pressured into picking a dress to please you or me. I want her this to be her special time. So you see what I'm saying, Mom? You could have said something like that rather than, Mom, I don't want you to say anything. I mean, the way that Brand said it, like, you can't say anything. Don't say anything. Don't give opinions. Don't give any feedback. Nothing. There's nothing out of your mouth. I'm sort of exaggerating a little bit, but it was similar to that kind of vibe. And it was like, oh. Now, again, you could say it's justified because of the way Betty treats him, but then it starts to raise some questions of what's this family actually like? Is the family the way it looks thus far in the season? Probably not, because we're just seeing a little snippet. Is Brandon also part of the aggression and the put down nature of communication and does Brandon sometimes exhibit dominance? Do the men in this family both dominate the mom sometimes, and that's why the mom has to fight for herself. I wouldn't be surprised if there were other dynamics in this family that we just haven't seen any evidence of yet. Hannah says, my husband would totally be like this with the dress. So in the video, Brandon was like, I don't care what kind of dress. Don't ask me. I'm mocking him, but Hannah says, my husband would totally be like this. He seems to always be afraid of getting in trouble. Right. Well, Hannah, there are ways of helping people like that, therapy being one. M says, I do have to give Brandon kudos for telling his mom not to give her opinion on Julia's dress. Feels like the first time he's actually stood up for Julia. Yes, but if the rules in this family is in order to be functional, you have to be dominant and put other people in their place, that's not a good precedent. Just because mom bulldozes Brandon doesn't mean Brandon should be bulldozing mom. All the bulldozing is probably not going to facilitate everyone's needs. Marguerite says, to be fair, my husband is pretty differentiated, but he also thinks every dress is good too. Yeah. So, in the video, I was saying, like, it's kind of interesting that Brandon is just so stand up. Now, I will say that there's nothing strange or unusual or pathological about a third party, Brandon, going, I don't really care what dress, they all look good. There's nothing wrong with that. It was his attitude, though. It was like the vibe he was giving off was like he was someone they just dragged it off the street, or like a distant cousin that wasn't even going to the wedding. Of just like, why are you asking me? He's the husband. He should at least act like it kind of matters. It almost looked like he didn't even want to be there. And that was the part of it that I was wondering, why would he be that way? It'd be one thing to be like, honey, I am into this. I like all of them. They all look fantastic. I don't know how to choose. I mean, there was that one that had the thing, and then there was that other one that had the other thing. I don't know. Which one do you like? I'm curious what you like, because Brandon's capable of that kind of vibe, I think, with Julia. But instead, he was just like, I don't know. Yeah, he was kind of anxious about like even involving himself in the conversation, and I think that has to do with what Hannah is talking about in terms of, not avoiding any kind of conversation like that because you're so terrified that you're going to get in trouble later, and that would be consistent not only with his behavior this season, but also with my conceptualization of him. All right, let's go to Jovi and Yara videos. Good old Jovi and Yara. Rose says, okay, and because I was talking about addiction and alcoholism. Rose says, addict here. The way you explained substances making us feel normal is so accurate. I became a heroin addict at 15. I went to rehab at 18. I relapsed at 19. I got back into recovery only to find out that I'm bipolar. I'm receiving therapy for this, and it's a game changer, and it has helped a lot, but I still don't always feel as normal as I did on opiates. Right. So what I was saying was that due to trauma or mental illness, when people take particularly heroin and opiates, they will feel normal for the very first time, and meaning that they take the substance and they're like, oh, I think this is the way everyone else feels all the time. Like they don't have that running anger at themselves and other people, and this running stress and anxiety, and it's not just anxiety like, oh, I'm afraid of heights. It's like a deep sense of like malaise in your soul and your psyche, and when you take the opiates, it just takes it away. And as Rose is pointing out, even though Rose is recovered, and I'm hoping getting ongoing support for sobriety, getting treatment and therapy for bipolar, Rose is still saying like, with opiates, I felt normal. Now, obviously the consequences to addiction far outweigh that benefit, particularly as time goes on, and people often become tolerant of the substance such that the bad feelings start to emerge even when they are using. Anyway, Summer says, I think you did such a great job explaining how people get into substance abuse. I will be honest, I have never been able to feel empathy for the way people get on drugs, but the way you explained it really made sense to me, and I wanted to thank you for that. Yeah. Summer, you're normal. I was like this too. We have a ton of propaganda telling us that people that use substances are immoral. There's a lot of reasons for this. One of them is, frankly, racism. As a way of trying to keep the non-whites down, they would, so let me back up. So when you oppress certain groups of people, one, economically, they are going to suffer. Two, they are also going to suffer from more stress, and then there's going to be more trauma in their life. They're not going to be able to have enough time to parent their own children. If they're working 3 different jobs and they're being thrown in jail unfairly, and they have to maybe do a couple petty crimes to get by, or they have to go on unemployment and they're super stressed out, because of the oppression of these groups, because certain groups aren't allowed into middle class and upper class. It just creates more stress for them. And you have generations upon generations. And then, of course, you have, historical slavery and mistreatment and lynchings and all the stress that people go through. And then that gets passed down through the generations. I'm talking specifically about black people, but I'm really talking about any group of oppressed group, of which there are many. And indigenous people, general people of color, LGBTQIA people, people with disabilities, the list goes on and on. Women. When you keep certain groups down, then it raises their stress level. It makes it harder for them to be happy. It makes it harder for them to function. It makes it harder for them to parent their children. Refugees, for example, war refugees from Poland or Jewish people, or from China or Vietnam, from certain parts of Africa. There are known, proven generational traumas that get passed down where, because of the trauma that this generation went through, and they bravely and courageously survived enough to have children and to get those children out of that war zone. But they had bigger fish to fry than to really pay attention to all the needs of the children. There was like literal life or death scenarios that superseded any kind of advanced parenting that might go on. Well, then those kids have attachment injuries. Those kids grow up, they have kids. Those kids, that they had were not in that trauma, but they inherited some of that trauma because of the pain, the PTSD, the parenting deficits. So those grandkids of the people that were adults as they were going through the terribleness now also have issues, but they never went. They might be middle class. They might have regular lives in a safe, non-war zone area, and then they have kids. And then so the power structure looks at those people and says they're that way because of their race. They're that way because of their gender. They're that way because of weakness. There's something wrong with them. You're also getting stressed out by the oppression that's happening. Even if you're 5th generation down, you're still getting that oppression. You're stressed out. You don't know what to do. You're very uncomfortable and you're traumatized, and maybe there's some early childhood issues from your community, from the law, from the criminal justice system, from your parents, who knows. And you grow up and you're in this constant state of fear and upsetness. Well, one of the things that people will turn to is substances, not on purpose, but again, the story I told in the video was you get your wisdom teeth pulled out, they give you a Percocet, you take it, an opiate, you get a painkiller, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I've never felt so relaxed. I've never felt so normal. I can think straight. This drug is amazing. Where do I get myself more of these? Does anyone have any extra Vicodin or OxyContin or what, and you start looking around, and then you run out of pills because it gets expensive, and then that's when you go to heroin because heroin is cheaper. And now the system, because they don't want to acknowledge how the system has done this to them, not only in the moment but historically, they say there's something wrong with them. They are weak. They are sinners. They are I don't know, their race doesn't think straight. It's cultural. You'll hear me say it. It's a cultural thing. Well, that is very self-serving to the power structure. The power structure benefits because they don't have to look at themselves, 1. 2, they don't have to do reparations. 3, they don't have to help Because if it's their problem and now they're a lost cause, they're weak-willed, they don't have willpower like us. But the problem is people in the power structure, they also have substance abuse problems. They also have addiction and habit problems. But we don't have a system in our criminal justice system that really focuses on that. We often excuse that. They can get better lawyers. The police react to them differently. And it just keeps going and going and going. And wow, I just really went on a huge rant about something that I didn't think I was going to talk about. But Summer, when you say, I didn't used to have empathy for why people get on drugs, I was the same way too. Why? Because the power structure gets into our head. The power structure needs us to believe that to be true. Because if we believe it to be true, then we will be soldiers in the oppressive war on the oppressor's side. One of the best ways that the 1% will get us to do their bidding is through propaganda and thought control. And it's not insidious. It's not Illuminati. They're not sitting there going, all they got to do is just say certain things and in a certain way, and we believe it. Instead of listening to the experts, myself and other people who work with substance abuse, we need to change that. How do we change that? We got to speak up. Got to have compassion. We have to have a general idea that maybe what I've been told through society isn't exactly wise or accurate or right-headed. Maybe there's some things about the way I think that are wrong-headed. Maybe I should seek out other voices. Or maybe I should even listen to people who suffer from addiction. What's their life like? How did they get there? Why did they get there? What happened there? Was it weak-willed or was it something else? It's always something else. E.G. says, wow, this conversation about alcoholism is really eye-opening. There was a guy in my university who everyone knew as a party animal, and I just thought was irresponsible because he always comes to class late and had a lot of stories about drinking too much at parties. But as Dr. Honda was listing off the symptoms, every box was checked for this guy. Now I feel kind of bad in retrospect since he was probably going through it. Yeah, good for you, E.G., for having compassion. Crystal says, respect to Jovi for standing by Yara instead of putting pressure on her and teaming up against her. Shows that the conversation she had with him went into his head. Yeah, we seem to be seeing kind of a shift in the Jovi and Yara story, a little bit of a reprieve from some of the negativity. I still believe that the relationship could benefit from a lot of changes in the way that they think and communicate about their feelings, but they seem to be improving, kind of. Courtney says, can I just say, the rate at which you pump out content blows my mind. Thank you so much for the content stream of enlightening and informative content. Your work is appreciated. Well, Courtney, that's nice of you. People sometimes say that. It's like, I don't understand, how do you produce all this content? Well, I'll tell you, I have a mission in life, and that is to, in my small way, try to make the world a better place. And I'm highly driven by that, very highly driven. And also what helps is my interactions with y'all, these comments, for example, the Q&As I do on YouTube. During the pandemic, it's one of my only sort of social outlets. It's not traditional socializing, but it kind of feels like socializing. I'm watching the show and I'm reacting, and then even as I'm reacting, I'm thinking, I wonder what everyone's going to think about this. And then you read the comments, and then I do these comments, and then you people, contact me, and it's I think it's why bands and musicians will do live shows. I mean, one is the money, but as a musician myself, I don't make much money from doing live shows. Why do I do it? Why not just do a video or just record all the time? And I do those too, but when you do it in front of other people, then it's communal. We're social creatures, and so I do this, and it really meets my own needs. I look forward to this kind of thing. The other thing is that over my career, I've been doing this podcast for 13 years, and in the past 6 years, people, when I first started on Patreon, actually 6 years ago, people started to slowly sign up on Patreon. And now that my YouTube channel is doing kind of well, I also get some funding through advertisements and sponsors. And so from that funding, I can actually scale back on a lot of my other work, and I can dedicate more of my time to this podcast. I still have these other jobs, which I'm very dedicated to, but I am able to scale back. And so a big reason, if we rewind the clock back 6 years, there's no way I could do all this stuff because in order to pay my bills, I had all these other jobs that I had to do. I had my practice and my supervision practice, and I was writing a book, and I'm a professor full time. And I always feel the need to point out that I'm a professor at a university, but a big part of my job, if not most of my job as a professor at a university, is administrative. There's meetings and advising and planning and accreditation and prep and correcting papers. And the actual job of teaching is a pretty minor part of my week. So I don't know why I'm telling you that, but my point is that, and I'm actually soon going to be scaling back from my university work as well. I'm still going to be a professor, but I'm going to really scale back on that. And so I can, because right now I'm doing a lot of things at once, a lot of things are overlapping, and it'll be nice to scale back on that. So I just have a little bit of breathing room. But anyway, some people say that, wow, you're doing a lot of things. How do you do all these things? Well, it's because of you. You become a patron. You watch the ads, and I see comments sometimes where people are like, make sure you watch the ads because that supports Kirk, and that's really nice, and that really is real. Every time you just let an ad sort of, you don't have to, you can skip the ad if you want to, but every time that happens, it's a little bit, it's like a 10% of a penny that goes into a little jar, and that adds up, and so that I can not have to do my other things, and I can do this, which I kind of consider to be the next phase of my career. I don't know if you wanted to know all that information, but that's my answer to that. Final comment from Katarine. Couldn't they, who are we talking about? Jovi and Yara. Couldn't they agree to have a big wedding at a later date when her family can come over, or they all go over there and have a big wedding? They should pacify the parents so Jovi and Yara can just go to Vegas. Right. Frequently on this show, I am thinking, why is everyone there are so much bigger fish to fry, like the fact that some of these people are in the midst of a pandemic, that the families live on the other side of the planet. I just don't understand why people aren't thinking about creative options. It's like, hey, let's do a big wedding here to please Jovi's parents, and then a week later we'll fly out to Yara's neck of the woods and we'll have a big wedding over there. Or we will elope, just the two of us, and then once we get enough money, maybe 6 months, maybe a year, we'll have a massive party for everyone else. I promise you, we'll do it, and everyone will be there, and it'll be glory. I don't understand why there's no discussion of that. Rebecca and Zied, similar thing of just like, but Ramadan's getting away, and I'm thinking, just get married, just get him locked down so he doesn't have to go back, and two, so they can still live together during Ramadan. So just get out of the way, and then after that you can have your big thing. Let's zoom out, people. In the grand scheme of one's life, how important is the wedding ceremony? It's important, and it can be of varying importance, but let's really think about it. The bigger picture here. I'm just going to guess, and if you've had a past big wedding in your past, think about how important it felt in the moment, and think about how important it actually was in the grand scheme of your life. Do you wish you did? Do you wish you kind of spent half as much? Do you wish you wouldn't have gotten so worked up about it? Do you wish you would have just relaxed and enjoyed that's what most people say. Because a wedding is supposed to be a celebration for the beginning of a relationship, a union. it's also a cultural event, a religious event, a family event. But it's supposed to be a celebration of two people's love and their union, and the union of two families, I suppose. There are a lot of ways to do that. You don't have to do that the same day you get married. You could do that a little late. Anyway, point is that the show, I get frustrated sometimes with their sort of not thinking outside the box. And I think that's actually indicative of a lot of people. I think a lot of people have a hard time thinking outside the box. We put a lot of pressure on people to be a certain way and to have a certain kind of life. And when they don't, people look down. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is a trope to say, but whenever anyone goes to a wedding, at least half the people at the wedding are criticizing the wedding and go, oh, I don't know about those colors. Those napkins, pretty tacky. We have this weird culture that's been in development for the past 30 years of wedding snobbishness, and I don't think it's good for anyone, and I think people should knock it off. All right, everyone out there, please take care of yourself, take care of others, and knock it off, because we all deserve it. We really, really do.